Most regular hackers can attack personal devices, small and large networks, or companies. But when nation-state hackers go to work, entire countries get paralyzed. Millions of computers get infected, and massive infrastructure projects get turned into scrap. That's what happened during the Stuxnet attack, Operation Shady Rat, or the 2007 cyber attacks on Estonia. Each of these hacks had scale and sophistication nobody could imagine before, and each of them were done by countries who use cyber as a weapon of war.
And this weapon will not be put back into the box.
But how does that work? What can we learn about state hacker groups, and which of them are the most powerful? Let's dive in. Cyber armies can take all kinds of shapes and forms, depending on what countries need them for. For example, some of them work a bit like secret cyber police. A typical case of that is Ocean Lotus, a hacker group often associated with the Vietnamese government. It mostly targeted Vietnamese citizens and organizations whose views did not align with the government's. Golden Falcon is another such example. It's been linked to the government of Kazakhstan and conducted an extensive cyber espionage campaign against various Kazakh nationals. Both of them were also used to attack neighbors, and such attacks are incredibly common all over the world. Many countries are locked in pitched cyber battles with their neighbors, especially in parts of the world where there's some sort of armed conflict. Their cyber armies often act as an arm of the regular army, typically tied to an intelligence agency or two. The United Arab Emirates, for example, has been accused of hacking into the phones of the Emir of Qatar, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and other officials of rival countries, and even hiring former US cyber specialists to help with these efforts. Another country to do this is Israel. For decades, it fought wars with surrounding countries and established a powerful cyber army as a tool of its military intelligence, known as 8200.
If Iran wants to be treated like a normal country, let it act like a normal country.
And if the region wasn't volatile enough, Iran, a major rival of both Israel and UAE, boasts a massive cyber army of its own and conducts offensive operations across the Middle East.
The Iranians are unusually talented in cyber war for some reason we don't fully understand.
Just recently, they attacked Emirati government systems, Israeli infrastructure, and countless other targets. One of the ways for Israel to strike back against Iran's influence was to team up with other countries that find such attacks suboptimal. And now we come to yet another kind of cyber operation, those conducted to support or assist a larger force. Stuxnet, perhaps the most famous cyber attack ever, was most likely a collaboration of US and Israeli intelligence agencies. It targeted Iran's nuclear production facilities with a virus, which physically damaged some turbines.
What was created with Stuxnet was not just an operation to sabotage Iranian nuclear research. It was a new kind of weapon.
Russia is also often employing the help of allied countries. For example, Ghostwriter, a hacker group which conducted heavy attacks against Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states in support of Russia's invasions of Ukraine's territory, has been traced to Belarusian secret services, who acted as proxies, a cyber army for hire. And while stealing and extorting money are activities often associated with regular hacker gangs, it's not like some groups shy away from these practices. Enter North Korea and its Lazarus Group, a nation-sponsored threat actor that was pretty reliably tracked to the military of the secluded state. Some say that North Korean hackers are responsible for nearly half of all cryptocurrency theft worldwide. For all intents and purposes, crypto theft is now a major part of the economy of an entire country. And not only that, North Koreans also conducted WannaCry, which cost $4 billion in losses, and hacked into Sony just because of the film that made fun of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un.
They hate us because they ain't us.
China has been known to engage in massive amounts of such hacking too, although what they're after isn't some crypto, but rather industrial secrets. Operation Shady Rat, it targeted companies and agencies across the world, vacuuming anything from blueprints to medical records. Some say it greatly helped the Chinese aerospace industry, allowing it to catch up on decades of research. You may have noticed that the J-31, the latest Chinese fighter jet, is remarkably similar to the American F-35. Coincidence? Well, Snowden leaks say that no, not really. Okay, now it's time to talk about the countries with the largest cyber armies. Israel, North Korea, Iran, and the United Kingdom have all tried to reach this level. They invested massive resources into their cyber armies and conducted some very damaging operations. But they're still a shot away from the major league. I'm of course talking about the big three. One of them is Russia, a country whose cyber warfare roots go back to the early Cold War, which sat on the edge of developing its own rival to the internet, and which went to incredible lengths to punch way above its economic weight on the international scene. A distinctive feature of Russian state hackers is their tendency to hide beyond the image of regular petty cybercriminals, hacktivists, and criminal gangs. Maybe you remember Fancy Bear, also known as the Pawn Storm and Strontium. It terrorized companies, politicians, and entire countries across the world for years, pretending to be a ragtag group of hackers.
Cyber terrorism is real.
It's coming from the highest levels of the Russian government.
Well, they say they
Very
would not
scary.
necessarily be doing this unless they thought they had a proof.
Yeah.
Now, we pretty much reliably know that Fancy Bear was a project of Russian's military intelligence unit 26165, and headed by a lieutenant colonel of the Russian army. There are a host of similar groups across Russia. In 2016, they hacked into the Democratic National Committee to steal some documents and influence the presidential elections. In 2017, they attacked Ukraine.
The cyber weapon, not Petya, quickly spread, paralyzing major companies and causing more than $10 billion in damage.
A lot of variables contributed to Russia having one of the most powerful cyber armies in the world. It had scientists, intelligence agents, and military officials who all helped, and it practically legalized hacking to create a generation of strong cyber criminals. So yeah, we are probably going to keep hearing about Russian hackers for a long time. Another major player in the world of hacking is China, and its history is very different. If Russian hackers' roots go back half a century, China's a relative newcomer to the scene. The country's establishment started taking cyber warfare seriously only in the 2000s, and it experienced an unparalleled rise ever since. Its early days were marked by crude phishing you couldn't distinguish from a regular Nigerian prince email. But then, just several years later, they would strike with some of the largest industrial espionage campaigns in history. We already mentioned how it got its hands on the data of American aerospace manufacturers. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. General Motors, Google, Motorola, DuPont, and countless other Western companies admitted being breached by Chinese hackers at some point. And all of that in order to support the growth of China's economic power. Spare nothing. How does China's cyber army operate? We know that it works as a centralized force under the army's command, with its own units, officers, and personnel. But beyond that, very little is clear, except for the fact that it displays staggering levels of sophistication, insight, and planning in its operations. One of the most famous names associated with Chinese hackers is Volt Typhoon.
Volt Typhoon. This is a state-sponsored Chinese hacking group.
Was looking at ways to disrupt critical communications between US and Asia.
It's been behind several major hacks, one bigger than the next. A telling example was unveiled just recently, when the Typhoon hacked into major communications infrastructure across the Pacific, tapping all the nodes US military and commercial organizations used. What they mostly did is spying, but they also kept their hands on a kill switch, which would disable those networks in the case of invasion into Taiwan. And we now come to a cyber army that needs no introduction. In fact, it's not as much of a cyber army as a whole ecosystem of armies that all work under one command, even if it's not in full synchronicity. The US military literally invented the internet, so their rise to the pedestal of the world's top cyber power is nothing but expected. However, maintaining such status in a world where every other country has a hacker army of its own is not an easy task. A sort of unifying structure that helps the US government do that is the US Cyber Command. It unifies cyber forces of various branches of the US military, US Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Marines. And it has an estimated yearly budget of over $13 billion. Just for comparison, that's almost the entire GDP of North Korea. And the Cyber Command doesn't even include the agencies you might associate with state-sponsored hacking, the FBI, the CIA, and others. So the cyber force Uncle Sam can exert if he needs something hacked is just incomprehensibly massive, and it shows. Some of the biggest and most sophisticated cyber attacks that have ever been conducted were traced to the US intelligence agencies. One example of that is Operation Glowing Symphony, a case in 2016 when the US agencies hacked into almost every single computer ISIS used and took them all down at once, wiping out communication, intelligence, and media of an entire emerging state. And when ISIS tried to recover, gather its resources, and create new communication systems, the US would just do that again, and again, and again. This is just one example of countless incredibly sophisticated offensive campaigns the US conducted. There are so many we know about, and probably many, many more we don't.
This is not just about the Chinese, this is about the Russians, this is about the Iranians. These are all our potential adversaries who understand the things that underpin Western liberal democracies and are going after it. That's what keeps me awake.
The reach of the United States cyber army is sublime, awe-inspiring, and a terrifying sight to behold. I hope you like this brief run-through of the world of state-sponsored hackers. We didn't have time to delve into each instance too deeply, so tell us, which country's cyber army would you like to know about? Write that down in the comments. Don't forget to check out our other explainers, and share this video with those that might be interested. See you in the next one.